Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. Just as we're waiting for everybody to join and get settled in, there's just a few rules, housekeeping bits to go through. We do recommend using the speaker view to keep things less distracting for yourself. Unfortunately, all the attendees, you are muted by default and you can't unmute yourself. But if you have got any questions, the chat should be open, so you can put them in there. And if you've got any specific questions you want to ask for the Q&A session, if you put them in the Q&A bit at the bottom, you can upvote the most popular ones as well. And then that will give us a really good idea of what's important to yourself when we get to that section to be able to answer those. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, but we will email the answers out, including the ones not discussed in the workshop after the event's finished. It's always good to have a pen and paper handy, just so you can jot down any websites, resources, or useful phrases that come up. If you have got any technical problems, again, drop it in the chat. There's people from Trigger Hub on the webinar, and they should be able to help you out. And there will be about an hour. We are recording the webinar today, so for all the people that can't attend, don't make it, or want to watch it back, again, the link to that webinar will be sent out to you afterwards. We will be talking obviously about alcohol and drug addiction and the impact that it can have on other people's mental health. And some of these topics can be quite difficult, even if we don't expect them to be, and so it's fine to take a break if you need to in there. And again, like I say, the webinar will be recorded, so you can always come back and watch it later in there. And I think that looks like most of the people are in now. And so today we have two brilliant speakers with us. The first is Simon Thomas, who's former Blue Peter and Sky Sports presenter, who talks openly about his problems with alcohol and how it's affected both his professional and his personal life. And in January 2022, Simon had decided that his relationship with alcohol had to come to an end. Enough was enough. And now we find ourselves a year later, and he describes his sobriety as wonderfully liberating in sharing his experience and to inspire and to help others. The other person that we've got is a guy called Paul Chambers. And Paul's a neurodivergent mental health advocate and co-founder of the creative mental health charity PoetsIN. And Paul's managed multiple addictions and personality disorders and mental illness. And he's now the voice for learning your truth and what makes each person unique, what makes you unique, and being able to wear those mental health battle medals with pride and your past like a suit of armor. And Paul, I've got to say, is probably one of the most candid, brutally honest people that I've ever come across. You know, he doesn't hide anything. That does mean some of the things that he will say are probably not safe for work, but that's what we're here to do in there. And the topic for the conversation today is on addiction and substance abuse. And according to data published by the National Statistics, 1 in 5 young adults have used an illicit drug within the last 12 months. And the prevalence of drug use amongst students is leading to increased risks of addiction, mental health problems, as well as physical health problems. And alongside this, there's also concerns about the impact that it's having on students' performance in university and their future job prospects. So the question is, how do we engage young people to get them to talk about their addictions? And how can we use the lived experience of the speakers to be able to support them in the future? So to get things going, I think it'd be really good for the audience just to know a bit more about Paul and Simon's journey in there. So Paul, starting with you, can you share sort of your experience with addiction and substance abuse?
Sure, yeah. So my journey, I suppose, it started on the addictions front when I was about 13, and that was initially with alcohol. It turns out that I was masking mental illnesses and personality disorders that I didn't know I had, but at the time I was in a super dark place. I was living in Germany. I was being sent off to boarding school on a weekly basis, so I started taking a litre bottle of spirits from all different bottles to help me get through the week. And that kind of progressed from there to taking people's prescribed drugs from their bottles. I didn't care what it did. I just took them, and gradually escalated through to weed and solid, then pills, and pretty much everything up to crack, up to and including crack, including dealing. At one time to kind of fund it, but it wasn't until I went through pretty much 30 years of addictions in their various forms, and decided to clean up, in part because the choice was taken away from me, and that was when I kind of fell apart and began my mental health journey and began to learn about all the aspects of myself, my truth, and why I was doing what I was doing. And since then it's been brilliant. So
Yeah, it's good. So when you say it was taken away from you, what happened?
well, the choice was somewhat taken away from me because I'd developed quite an angry stomach ulcer over the years, and my lifestyle didn't do anything to quell that, and I ended up going to the doctors, and I had a very open relationship with my doctor. It's one of the safe places that I did have, and it just said, look, you know, we put the camera down and into my stomach and everything, and he said, if you don't change your ways, then it could rupture and kill you, and that's quite a wake up call.
Yeah, it's definitely a wake up call when you need one.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
And Simon, what did your journey with addiction look like?
I still find it strange hearing my name and then the word addiction alongside it, but it took me a long time to get to a place where actually I knew that's what I was when it came to alcohol. I mean, if I was to describe my whole story, it would take us way beyond the hour. So in a nutshell, drink really wasn't a part of my life until I went to university. And then I describe it when I went to Birmingham University many, many years ago in the mid-90s. It was like an alcoholic bomb going off. You know, that need to fit in, to try and fit in. Freshers Week, certainly when I was at university, was all about alcohol. Every single game, every single social function revolved around alcohol. And it was like a bit of a bomb going off. A substance I wasn't that interested in, had occasional pint of cider. I don't know why so many people start with cider, I think because it tastes sweet and it's half decent, and then you get onto the real stuff. And really after that, it was just this long kind of journey of alcohol playing an increasingly big part in my life. And I think where it started to become a real problem was when I started on Blue Peter. Now, there'll be lots of students watching this thinking, what on earth is that? Well, back in the day, it was a very popular children's program. It's still going. But when I was on it in the late 90s and early noughties, it was still a big show on the BBC, watched on a good day by around about 6 million people. So it was a big show. And I didn't deal with the fame side of being on the show that well. I loved the job so much. It was just an incredible 6 years, but I was never truly comfortable in my own skin. I was comfortable in front of a camera, like I feel fairly comfortable right now. But I think in my head, I had this feeling that because of the persona that you have to put on when you're presenting, you're trying to be yourself. But if you're having a bad day, you can't come on air at 5 o'clock on BBC One and say, hi, kids, I've had a rubbish weekend. I'm not really in the mood for this today, but let's crack on and see how we go. I just felt there's this expectation, even though I didn't know it was there or not, that when I was at social situations or at parties or whatever it might be, that because I was on the telly, people had an expectation of who I would be. So I'd fear that I wouldn't be this larger than life character. And so the mask, and we put on so many different masks in life, the mask that I put on was alcohol. It gave me that kind of confidence and then that spirit to be the life and soul. And that kind of carried on throughout my broadcasting career. And I think bit by bit, year by year, it became more and more of a problem, and I was drinking too much. Some of my friends and family would sometimes call me out on it, and we'll come on to talk about this later, I'm sure, in terms of the road to recovery and how that doesn't always help. So I kind of deep down knew that I had a problem, but really it didn't explode fully into addiction and destruction until back in 2017, when in the autumn of 2017, I was working at Sky Sports at the time. I was presenting the Premier League. And I just started encountering massive anxiety issues. I'd had depression before, was experiencing depression again. I began to get panic attacks before every game that I went on air. And then in amongst that, very sadly, during that period, my first wife, Gemma, fell very, very suddenly ill, was diagnosed with a rare form of blood cancer called acute myeloid leukemia, and died within 3 days from diagnosis. And I had an 8-year-old son, still have a son, have a daughter as well now, but he was 8 at the time. And really for the first 3 weeks after she went, I didn't touch a drop. I'd been off it for quite a few months at this point. I tried to step away from it. And I just had this little flicker of sanity in my head during that very confusing, painful time that said, don't mix grief and everything you've been going through before with alcohol. But once the funeral came and went, I started really laying into it. And to cut a long story short, I was pretty much drinking most nights. I was drinking vodka. I was getting to that stage where I was getting not quite immune to it, but you could drink more and more without it impacting the next day too much. The secret drinking began, which is a real sign you've got an issue, hiding it from friends, hiding it from my son. He was only 8 at the time, but he was getting a little bit of knowledge that something wasn't quite right. I just couldn't deal with the pain of what had happened and all the myriad of questions that when a big life event like that happens, throws at you. It kind of suspended for half an hour, maybe an hour, all those worries, all those fears. It numbed them, as alcohol does, but then it does the next thing, which is the dangerous thing. It drives you into an even darker place than you were before you started drinking. And that battle raged for probably 18 months. I've since got married again, got a wonderful wife called Dorina, but really, even though the drinking calmed down, it was still my go-to thing when I hit stressful points in life. So whether it was with relationships, whether it was home life, whether it was work, whatever it was, it would still be my go-to coping mechanism. And then last January, I decided enough was enough. And it was my decision. It wasn't being told I should do it, because that never works, which I'm sure we'll mention a bit later. And last January, I decided that was it. I drew a line in the sand, and with the help of others and a very good friend of mine who kept using this phrase that I love, and it's so applicable to so much in life. He had decided to step away from booze because he wanted to be the best version of himself. And for him, he felt that with alcohol in his life, he couldn't be that. And it really hit me hard between the eyes. And I looked at that and I heard it and I thought about it. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to be the best husband, if I'm going to be the best dad, the best brother, the best son, the best I can be at my job, I personally, because of my destructive relationship with it and my addictive personality, I'm an all or nothing kind of guy. I don't do anything by half measures, which has helped massively career-wise, but not when it comes to alcohol. It was time to step away.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned there about hiding your addiction, what sort of things were you doing to keep that under wraps or to stop other people noticing?
Oh gosh, I mean, I have to say, I don't know how Paul feels about this, but sometimes, and you have to just to find peace with this, you look back at those moments and you feel a sense of shame. A shame that you were doing this, that you were in such a place where your nearest and dearest, you were hiding it from them. So I came up with all sorts of tricks. My favorite one was using Diet Coke cans. So I still love Diet Coke. I know it's not great for you, but hey, it's better than the booze. And that would be the way I would do it. I'd get a bottle of spirits in it. And do you know what? In that 2018, it was a battle every day. I'd wake up and go, I don't want to wake up tomorrow feeling like I do now. It wasn't so much hangovers, it was just regret. And it was just that knowledge that last night I'd gone to a really dark place. And tonight I don't want to go to that dark place. And really that battle to not drink that day began from the moment your eyes opened. My first job of the day would be to get Ethan up, get his packed lunch done, get him to school. So you were kind of having to still function as a dad. But throughout the day, you are thinking, am I going to drink or not tonight? And the big moment every day was driving past the co-op on the way to pick him up from school. If I could get past the co-op, I probably wouldn't drink, because it would involve going into the shop and Ethan see me go into the shop. And by this point, he's beginning to put 2 and 2 together and know that I'm not going in to get snacks. I'm going in to get something I shouldn't be getting. So you began to kind of hide those moments of the day from other people. I'd go into the co-op Fairfield, because it wasn't too far from where we lived, that one of my friends would be there and they'd see me at the checkout getting another bottle of vodka in. And so I'd hide it in cans, I'd hide it around the house. And it was just the worst moment when someone would find it. And it's happened here where I live now. Before I gave up, hit some stressful points, I'd go and get another bottle of vodka and I'd hide it. And my wife, Dorina, once or twice found it, and it's crushing, it's embarrassing, it's humiliating, it is horrible. You feel like you're like a child again. Your parents have discovered you've got something you shouldn't have. And so that's why, for me, there's so much shame around it. But actually the release of what's happened over the last year is that, look, I can't change what came before. And the Paul will be the same. There's nothing he can do to change what happened before. All you can do is change what comes next. So I try and not look back with a sense of shame, but just go, look, that's what happened during that period. I wish it hadn't. I wish my son had not had to experience that. But hey, look at where I am now.
Paul, for yourself as well, coming in from a more of a substance abuse or substance addiction, what sort of things were you doing to manage your addiction and life at the same time when it was at its worst?
Oh, yeah. I mean, on the alcohol side, I didn't really hide anything. I think I kind of hid it in plain sight. I was party Paul. I always equate myself to. There's a character in Friends, which is the uncle, like the someone who's really fun, and then it turns out he's alcoholic, and he kind of comes out the other side of that, and he's boring. So like I was fun time Paul. So I didn't hide that. I was always drinking, and for me it was like I lived opposite an off license. Come back from work, straight in there, buy a couple of bottles of wine, and I'd get on it. But on the drug side, I surrounded myself with like-minded people, so I had my own place, and so I had a safe place within which to do, safe-ish place within which to do it. But it was very much a party flat, and people were allowed around at all hours. And then I'd go off to work the following day, and I'd go off to work with a come down and a hangover. I'd be gagging on the way into work. I was probably over the limit, and every part of that working day was leading up to me coming back and like sparking up a spliff, doing a line of coke, whatever, combine the two. But like talking about the hiding part, when Simon was talking then, it reminded me of a time I was doing Christmas dinner around my flat, and my parents were there. My parents divorced when I was younger, but they get on. So like the big occasions, they're there in the same place. And due to the nature of my flat, I made my bedroom into the dining room for some reason, cleared everything out. But throughout the process of cooking dinner, I was going into the bathroom and doing lines of coke throughout it, and still cooking. And then I could eat. So I got to a stage where, you know, I was so had such a tolerance to it that I could eat on it. I could continue to do it, and people wouldn't see it in me until I got to a point where the drink and the drugs combined gave me what my friends called pub eye, and then that was when I went and I'd pass out and I'd become a liability. But yeah, but it was, you know, there were ways and means. There were, and I got to the stage where I was even hiding it from my partner, where I'd go off to the bathroom and do a line of something. There was a period towards the end of my dark times where something called Meow Meow was very much on the scene. It was like hugely potent, ridiculously cheap, and you could buy 10 times as much for the same amount of money. And I just, like, if I was drinking, I'd pop off to the bathroom and go in my medicine cabinet and just shudder to think about it. But yeah, just do it in private. And like you say, Simon, you can't torture yourself looking back on these things. I go around schools and give talks where I say, you know, your past doesn't define you. It can be part of what you are now, but it doesn't ever have to define you. And you know, it can. You wear those battle scars and those medals with pride, and it's what you do with it now. So doing things like this, it can kind of help manage and compartmentalize those things that at the time seem completely normal. You've normalized them. You've normalized them to a degree to yourself. You understand on a level that they're wrong, but they're just part of getting by. And kind of numbing and keeping that mask on. I often use the mask comparison. It is like keeping this, because once you take that off, you are vulnerable.
Yeah. So when you get to that point where you say enough's enough, and you were saying there, Paul, about keeping this from your partner, and Simon mentioned again keeping it from his wife. How do you start to rebuild those relationships?
That is it's a really good question. I mean, and it only comes with time. That's really why I've only begun to speak publicly about sobriety in the last few weeks, because I felt that really, in order to have an authentic voice on this, I've got to travel a little bit. You know, if you took up running, you've never run before, you probably wouldn't put yourself out there as a spokesperson on the benefits of running after just 1 month, because people would look at you and go, you probably need to have run a little bit more than just a month before you can speak about this. So, you know, I had to wait some time before I thought I'll start talking about this. And really, when family and friends have seen, as they had with me, ultimately my attempts to give up end in failure, well, why would, on this occasion, are they going to trust me? And this time I made no big promises. I just quietly stopped that night on January the 3rd last year. And in my head, I knew this is the line in the sand over which I will not stop it. I will not tread again. I know there's going to be battles along the way. There'll be those moments where that voice in your head, and, you know, just coming back to what Paul was saying, what we were saying earlier, my experience of addiction is really with alcohol is that it becomes the predominant voice in your head that overrides every other thing. And that includes, sadly, as it was in my case, your other half, your children. You know, that voice that is saying, come on, you deserve this. Come on, this is the way we're going to get through this moment, this trouble that you're facing right now. The more important voice is the one that's saying, this is not going to help the situation. This is absolutely not going to help your marriage. This is not going to be good for your son. This is not going to be good for your mental well-being. It's not going to help you professionally. But that voice of addiction becomes so powerful that, in my experience, it just used to override all those other voices. And hence why so often I'd lose the battle and would end up stopping at the Co-op, or where we live now, Barclay stores just down the road, and buying. And I think they look at me now and think, he never comes in anymore. He just comes in to drop off ASOS parcels for the wife. He always used to get a little bottle of vodka. But it's really about journeying. You've got to rebuild trust with my wife Dorina had been broken so many times. I can't turn around to my son and expect him to suddenly be fear-free when it comes to his dad and drinking, because it's only been a week or it's just been a month. And listen, I'm not in any way, shape or form, for those watching on who maybe have done dry January, I'm not in any way lessening that as an achievement. That's massive. But because of my history with drink, I knew that I was going to have to journey for a few weeks and a few months and just take it day by day. That one of my friends says this to anybody who's trying to, you know, give up the drink and lead a sober lifestyle away from it, is just go to bed tonight sober. And that's his mantra. You know, when people are going, oh, how do you go about doing this? Just break it down. And now I don't count the days. I can tell you it's been a year, but I wouldn't be able to say it's a year and 18 days. It might be 90. I have no idea. But it was just bit by bit getting through the day and going, right, I've gone to bed tonight sober. And then the next night, and then the next night. Before you know, it's a week. Before you know, it's a month. Before you know, it's 6 months. And then, hey, it was a year. And it's been that process, that time, that's really begun to rebuild those bridges with everybody, and them learning to trust you again and go, actually, we can have because I have no problem with people drinking around me. We can drink around, and we don't worry about Simon heading out the room that he's off to find something in a bag somewhere. We know he's good on this one now, but that's taken time.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that whole idea of trying to have that mentality to do it step by step. I think a lot of people think they need to make this huge, massive change and it has to happen like that. But actually what you're saying is, you know, you need to be prepared to go through that journey and take it each day as it comes, which is really interesting. And I think for a lot of young people, there was a HEPI survey recently that sort of suggested that 3 in 10 students wouldn't disclose information about their drug use for addiction because they have this fear of punishment in there, that, you know, if I come forward and say something, that's it, my university journey is over. You know, I'm going to get kicked out, my parents are going to be embarrassed, I'm going to get pressure from my peers, etc. So what are the most effective ways that you would say that we can create a safe and supportive environment for young people to discuss their addictions? Paul, I know you've done a lot of work in prisons and schools already. So what's your opinion on being able to create safe spaces?
Oh, I think they are. It's paramount to be able to create a safe space where there are open forums where you can speak without judgment. Closed forums as well, because some people are uncomfortable talking about it in front of others, to be able to speak without judgment, or fear of repercussions, and even to the point of anonymous channels to speak openly and candidly. I mean, it's one of those things that once you start talking about it and you push through that sort of perceived membrane of judgment and come out the other side, it's almost like, well, it sounds heavy, but it's almost like being reborn a different person, because the honesty that is attached to it and speaking openly is cathartic, it's therapeutic, it's everything. And to kind of have that in a place where there's no judgment is absolutely key. And it's something like my charity does. We're all a lived experience team, and we kind of we will, without judgment, give people a place, whether that's group, one-to-one, anonymous, or whatever, where people can speak and nothing comes back to them. But I have to say, I have found, and we were having a conversation about LinkedIn earlier, and like how it's kind of lost some of its stuffy ways. The more you talk about something, those fears of that judgment are lessening. I've found personally, the more brutal you are about your past, the more forgiving people are. It's almost like, oh wow, he's saying this, and like there's no pretenses here, and you kind of, people have to process it, and there's definitely differences happening. There's a different approach, I think, in workplaces and those places where people might feel fearful of speaking. Like there's stigma stripping away. We've got a long way to go, but we've come a very, very long way. Sorry, I probably went right off piece there. That's what I do.
No, there's some really interesting points that you mentioned, though, particularly about LinkedIn. And I think social media in general, we kind of have this idea that it can be quite a negative place at times. Even if you look at performance enhancing drugs, and you think young lads, they want to go to the gym, they want to get build up, have that kind of perfect physique. And if they start going on Snapchat or TikTok or any of these platforms, and they start looking at gym routines, then very suddenly they're seeing all these images of this ideal body, and then quickly followed is steroids are your answer, steroids are your shortcut, it's helped me achieve this, it's done this, there's no risk involved, I'm great for doing it. And it kind of makes it seem like it's the acceptable route to go. It totally takes the barriers away, and they think, well, actually, if it's worked for that guy online, then I'm going to give that a go. And we need more of these authentic voices out there on social media platforms saying, well, actually, this is my experience, this is what I've been through, these are the challenges that I face, this is my tried and tested strategy to get through it, to cut through some of that noise and rubbish that young people have been exposed to, that they see as the truth, to actually say, well, this is how you deal with it, this is how you manage it. And there is hope, and there is compassion, and there is a community out there that want to support you.
I've been really surprised, actually, sorry, since I started speaking more publicly about sobriety, at the response I've got from people. I thought there'd be some who just see you as the fun police, like, oh no, here we go, another one who's going to shout down alcohol. I've always been very clear that I'm not some anti-alcohol campaigner. I just recognize that for me and countless others, it's nothing but bad news. But there's quite a lot of people who have a perfectly okay relationship with it, but there's an awful lot of people who do not. So I was a bit wary about posting anything about it. I didn't want to be misconstrued as that person. And also, I just wondered how people react. And I'd say 95% of the comments that I've had back over the last few weeks have been incredibly positive. Some really, really sad in terms of the way alcohol has ruined their own relationship, or they've seen loved ones die because of alcoholism. And I just want to come back to something that Paul said earlier, because in terms of support and in terms of helping each other, he kept saying the word judgment, and that is just the truth when it comes to this area. Judgment, when it comes to dealing with something you're struggling with, is the worst cocktail. And I really struggle with it. And in sort of late 2018, 2019, when a number of my friends and family were increasingly worried about how much I was drinking, and I had gone to Alcoholics Anonymous, which I think are brilliant, but like anything, they don't work for everybody. It's not everybody's forum. In the same way that counseling isn't for everybody, medication isn't for everybody. We'll all have different ways of finding our way through stuff, but Alcoholics Anonymous just didn't work for me. So I was being accountable to two friends. So I'd given them permission to ask the questions about how the drinking was going. So it was like this little accountability group, and it just didn't work. For one reason or another, it just didn't work. I had one friend who just had it down to a T in terms of how you go about, because when you say to friends, I want to be accountable, I'm struggling with this, so I'm giving you permission to ask me the tough questions. I won't always appreciate being asked tough questions, but I'm giving you permission. So I'd given these two friends permission to ask the tough questions. One would ask the question in a spirit of love and encouragement and support. So his tone was always, when we were chatting, how's the drinking going? Disarming. It doesn't put you on the back foot. You're straight away going, okay, this week it's been not good. My other friend, to whom I was accountable to, was very much, what's going on with the drinking? There was aggression in his voice or his text, and my response every time was just to get on the front foot and come out swinging, because I hated that idea that I was being judged. I knew I had a problem deep down. I really did. But I hated being judged. So we have to, as Paul was saying, we have to create forums. We have to create safe spaces where people can open up, because we cannot live in a situation, a society, where someone is struggling with drug addiction at university or alcoholism at university and is worrying that by opening up, which ultimately will help them on a path to recovery, is going to be damaging going forward in life. We've got to take that away. And I think Paul's absolutely right. People talking about this more openly on social media, like Instagram, like LinkedIn, it's making it more okay that we understand there's way more people out there struggling than we ever knew. So it has to be always without judgment.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, go on, Paul.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing to that, which kind of like linked back to the how do you repair the relationships, and I think I've told you about this, Stuart, in a previous chat, but last year, so a good 8 years after starting my mental health journey, and a few years beyond that of kind of coming out of addictions, I got the courage up to tell my mum everything. And my mum is possibly one of the reasons I have the mental illnesses I do. She's incredibly austere, and possibly has Asperger's, so is unable to change her thinking around things. But she was one of the people that did comment on my behavior. So last year I found myself going on more podcasts, having more conversations going around schools, and thought sooner or later my mum's going to hear about the drug part of it all. And the judgment that was attached to that conversation that I had assumed was going to happen was almost crippling. But I got the bravery in place. I went round there, and when you're building up to something, then the words are coming out. It's like, Mum, I need to tell you something. And what's that? It's about my dark times. She's like, oh, you didn't kill someone, did you? Which was her go-to. But then I told her everything, absolutely everything. She thanked me afterwards. And this was the one person I built up to be the pinnacle of judgment of a negative nature. And since then, our relationship has been so much better, because she understands why I did what I did. And so, yeah, that judgment, sorry, I just had to kind of like put that in there, because it can, the thought of it can be so much bigger than the result of actually talking.
Yeah, definitely. When it does come to talking, though, and taking away that judgment, obviously a lot of young people won't speak up because they have this fear of punishment, fear of judgment. respect of their peers, etc. How would you handle a situation if you could see a young person struggling with their addictions, but they're not ready to talk? What would be your approach to get them to sort of open up a bit and start discussing that? Yeah, Paul. Yeah.
Well, actually, I do have experience of this because I do mentoring, and I suppose just being there for someone, holding space for them at an agreed time, and whether they want to talk or not, you're there. And I would share I would talk about my experiences, the bad, mostly, but touching on something Simon said, it's not all bad memories. There's some good things there as well as some fun things, but let them know ultimately how disruptive things were, and just hold space and be there time and time again, and just talk about anything, just talking about anything. And ultimately you build the trust, or in my experience, I've built the trust through sharing my lived experience. The trust grows, and then it will eventually, the subject will come to the forefront, and you can start tiptoeing around it, and then speaking to it more, and then wrestling it to the ground, and kind of coming out with some tools and some ways to come out the other side of it. So that's my experience.
Yeah, I think that lived experience element, particularly with addiction, is really powerful. Because when you talk to people like yourself, you're both quite open and candid, and there's that realization for someone that, again, coming back to what Simon was saying at the beginning, when we were at uni, there was this hard drinking culture. Like, everybody drank all the time, going out, getting smashed, rolling out the club at 2 a.m, barely able to stand, was like acceptable. It was completely normal. You didn't necessarily see it as a problem. It was part of uni life and who you were as a young adult. But actually now, when you look back at it, yeah, that probably was an issue, absolutely, 100%. But having these types of conversations makes you realize, well, actually, I was pushing it way too far, and it did have a lot of risk attached to it and a lot of harm attached to it. But you don't start to form that opinion until you really speak to people that have been through it, and they're being so open and candid. So I think those types of conversations and that type of mentoring that you're talking about there, Paul, is probably a number one way to get young people engaged, just to get them to start thinking about these ideas in there. But when it comes to your own addictions, what sort of strategies did you use to overcome that and start that recovery journey? What did that look like for you, Paul?
For me, I'm very much a visual learner, and I need to understand something to kind of work my way around it. So if, for example, I always use this example to giving up cigarettes. I know it's like it's less frowned, well, maybe not so less frowned upon now, but I'd kind of, because of the stomach ulcer, I'd been vomiting all night, like aggressively and painfully, and I found myself not wanting a cigarette for one day. I knew that 48 hours and the nicotine was out of my system, so then it's psychological after that. And I'd just research it, and I'd know that when you had a cigarette after a meal, that released fatty acids, and so for 20 minutes after a meal I wouldn't eat, because that was how I wouldn't kind of replace that with food, and so on. So kind of, for me, stick a label on it, look into it, understand how to get around it, and then I tap into my obstinacy. The fear of being beaten by something, when I'd finally flipped the switch from, no, I'm going to do this because I really enjoy it, to, no, I'm not going to do this because this is bad. Once that switch is flipped, and I was having this conversation with a mentee yesterday, actually, that you just have to tap into that. No, I'm not going to be beaten, because all of us have a stubborn streak. It's just attributing that to something where the stubbornness was previously, no, I'm going to have a drink, or I'm going to have a line, or I'm going to have a spliff, or whatever. Actually attributing that to, no, I'm not, I'm going to go to bed sober, Simon said, or no, I'm going to be able to go out and be around people that are doing coke, and I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to drive home, and that's okay, and that's me having beaten it this one day. It's like it's like a tick on a calendar of, like, I've done that. I like to be faced with things when I'm beating them, and if I can do that I gave up smoking halfway through a cigarette packet, and I sellotaped it up, and it was there. So I feel like I'm beating it better if it's there in my face. That's personally how I kind of managed my obstinacy.
And Simon, for yourself, what sort of lessons did you learn through the recovery process, and what advice would you give to young adults today that may be struggling?
One thing I learned quite quickly, and I had seen this before when I had given up before, is that we in this country in particular, because of the way that alcohol is entwined in our culture, and I know things have changed at university, certainly since I was there, in terms of how dominant a part alcohol plays in university culture. But you know, within the sporting world that I inhabit, you know, alcohol and sport go hand in hand. You know, if you take alcohol out of the darts that are on Sky every Christmas and around the year, it's a totally different atmosphere. Probably half the people are there. If you take the alcohol out of the Cheltenham Festival every year, that roar ahead of the Cheltenham Gold Cup is probably about 25% as loud. You know, it's going to be quiet. You know, football, rugby, whatever you look at, a day out of the cricket. I used to love going to the cricket and watching England play. It was always, though, about, you know, how much drink are we allowed to get into the ground? How much is the pint going to be when we get there? So it's so entwined in our culture that one of the things that I found is that, bizarrely, we get sometimes quite weird reactions from people to when we say we don't drink, and often it's from friends, people close to us, because, and I'm sure Paul will probably agree with this, is that when in life we say, like, we've given up smoking, or I haven't had a cigarette for 6 weeks now, or 6 months, people applaud you, like, slap you on the back, well done, mate, brilliant, because we know that smoking is bad for us. Probably the same with drugs as well. If you've been clean for a couple of years, people are just like, well, you know, I want to give you a big slap on the back, applaud you, cheer you. Sometimes when you say I don't drink, people look at you like you are just odd. Like, why have you, what? You don't drink? Why not? They're full of questions. And for some people, they get quite defensive. It's like an affront that you don't drink. And they're trying to almost force you to have a drink. Come on, just one won't hurt. And I always find that such a weird thing. Such a weird thing. Can you imagine going to a restaurant or going around to your friends for dinner and you're a vegetarian? It's the equivalent of sitting around the table and your mate trying to force a rump steak down your neck. They just wouldn't do it. But when it comes to alcohol, we sometimes get quite weird reactions. And I think what I've learned in the time that I've been sober is that I think, and I'm no psychologist, but my hunch is what is happening in those moments where someone actually responds quite badly to you not drinking, is that in some ways you, just by saying you don't drink, you're holding up a mirror. And in that mirror, they're seeing themselves, and they probably know deep down that their relationship with alcohol isn't great. And you're kind of almost, without meaning to, calling them out on their relationship with the booze. So I've learned that you can get a whole number of reactions. I think the most important thing has been for me over the last year, and there have been probably only a handful of moments where that voice that I mentioned before came back and said, come on, this situation will be better with a drink, or you'll just be able to, you know, numb how you're feeling right now. And sometimes I actually audibly vocalize my voice back at that and go, yeah, but remember what doing what you're suggesting I do means. Just look at the trust. You know, I actually talk to myself. I know people might think that's mad, but sometimes you've got to vocalize it. You've just got to shout back at that voice and say, no, I'm not going to break the trust that I built up over the last 6 months with my wife and with my son and with my friends and with my family. So no, I'm choosing not to drink. So sometimes it's got to be an act of will. It has to be an act of will. There's no magic solution to giving up drugs, to giving up smoking, to giving up alcohol. That it has to be an act of will, which comes back to what we said earlier. It has to be ultimately your decision, not doing it on behalf of others who are worried. It has to start with you, and that's an act of will. If you want to start training for a race or a marathon in a few months' time, that starts with an act of will, of putting on the trainers, putting on the shorts and taking that first step. No one else is going to run that race for you. And the other thing is, I remind myself of just how amazing the benefits have been of being free from alcohol. You know, one of the things I've really enjoyed this Christmas just gone, you know, people are saying, you're going to be all right over Christmas. You know, you're going to be okay not drinking. It's like, absolutely fine. The joy of being present has been massive. You know, I've got just next door, a 16-week-old daughter. So I've got a 13-year-old son and a 16-week-old daughter. So I'm straddling both ends of the parenting spectrum. But the joy of being present this Christmas, we had a big family Christmas away in the Cotswolds, really blessed time. And it was just wonderful to be truly present. None of that kind of brain fog the next day that so often would come after a day of overindulgence in alcohol and food. The joy of being present, the health benefits, just feeling fresher, you know, getting up in the morning with a clear head. It's apparently, I've been told, good for your skin. You have a bit of a glow about you. There are so many benefits to it, but ultimately I feel that it's been liberating. And so when those moments come where there's that little voice in your head saying, come on, remember how much this used to numb the pain, the benefits far outweigh, and at that point the conversation ends and you go to bed sober that night.
Yeah, I really like that strategy you just gave about vocalizing what you're doing, because with a lot of these things, they become habit forming, don't they? You know, what Paul was saying, I'll be cooking, so I have a line of Coke, or I get home from work, I'll go to the off license, or I'll sit down for the night and have a spliff. It starts to become routine, but actually when you vocalize it and point it out, it almost moves it from where you're doing it almost unconsciously, just because that's what you always do, to being there in that moment thinking, well, why am I now doing this? What is the benefit?
There's a lot of, sorry to jump in, but it's a really good point you're touching on there, because I'm part of an online group on Facebook that's run by the guy who's kind of been my mentor on the alcohol and the sobriety journey. And it's a safe space. You know, you have to answer some questions before you are considered to be a member of the group. So it's a safe space, and everybody in the group are on different journeys. Some are still drinking, but they're thinking about maybe giving it up, kind of sober curious, I think we call them. Some who've been sober for 20, 30 years, others who just begun the journey. And it's a wonderful group in that there is none of the judgment. You can ask anything, you can say anything. But one of the most common things that comes up when people join the group, and maybe they have just begun the sobriety journey, is rituals. So much of alcohol in particular is based around rituals. You know, someone just put a comment up last week saying, I've really struggled this weekend. He's just stopped at the start of the year, you know, because I'm so used to on Friday night, I've finished my working week, I want to crack open a beer, I want to crack open a bottle of wine to have with my meal, and then Saturday I want to watch the sport with a can of beer in my hand. And as people vocalize these things, you think about them, you realize how many of our rituals in life, in society, revolve around booze. And so that becomes, you know, quite a big thing to break in the early periods of if you're choosing a sober lifestyle, breaking some of those rituals. But you can break them and you can still enjoy all those things, the end of the week. And the alcohol-free market now is amazing. When I first gave up many years ago, not for very long, I think Caliber was the only thing on the market in terms of beers. It was a disgusting alcohol-free beer that you could probably have about one of, and then you'd give it a rest. But now there's alcohol-free gins, loads of alcohol-free beers, and you can feel, you know, like you are having a drink if that's how you feel you want to get through it, but you're not actually imbibing any alcohol. But there's a lot of rituals around drinking which are hard to break.
Yeah, definitely. Time is pressing, so I think before we jump into the Q&As, from both of you, it'd be really nice to get a final thought on what you know about addiction now that you wish you knew when you were younger. Paul, if we start with you.
So, like for me, it was I've learned that, or if I could go back and tell myself that I'm just numbing myself to what I'm feeling, and I'm not facing my truth. And the truth is, actually, I'm like a pretty decent person that people can get on with when I'm not off my nut or not completely drunk. I've actually got something to say without it. But also that I'd have probably a portfolio of properties now with the money that I spent on drinking drugs over the period, and like if I could have gone back and told myself, you know, stop like spaffing all that money, and you might actually get some properties behind you. But overall, that you're not missing out on anything. FOMO is a lie. You're chasing a night or a feeling or like a state of being that you might achieve once, but you'll never achieve it again. And those people that are around you that you think are absolute soulmates aren't. They leave you when you change, and you change for the better. So doing it earlier and being honest with yourself is key. There we go. Not very succinct, but that's me all over.
Oh, good advice there, Paul. Simon, how about yourself?
I think if I was the younger version of myself again, knowing what I do now, I wish I'd known that alcohol actually definitely isn't an escape. It isn't a release, and it isn't a very good way of avoiding pain. All it does is suspend it momentarily and then intensifies it. My experience of my battle with alcohol, particularly, you know, post November 2017, when my first wife died, is that with everything that was going on, what effectively alcohol was doing, and it's the same if you're using alcohol to deal with mental health problems, you're dealing with alcohol to cope with perhaps the loss of a relationship or grief or mental health problems, whatever it might be. What I wish I knew then, but I know now, is that drinking is like trying to put out a fire with a can of petrol. It just intensifies everything, and it leads you, and it led me at least twice to a really dangerous place where the darkness closed in heavily under the influence of alcohol to wanting to end it. And the only thing, thankfully, that kept me from doing that was the image of my son Ethan. You know, he'd lost his mum, he can't now lose his dad. Somehow, amidst my stupor, amidst my my drunkenness, I managed to have just that brief same moment where I just knew that was not the right path. But it's like a really bad rocket fuel to all your worst problems, alcohol. And I wish I'd known that all those years ago.
Yeah, definitely. We've had some really good questions come in as well. So the first one says, what would you recommend for people who don't want to get on a 12-step approach, are looking for other types of support? Paul, I think you might be placed to answer that with all the work that you've done with students and in prisons already.
Sure, yeah. I mean, acknowledging it at first is you're already part way there to reaching out. Now, if you don't want to involve someone else, I would always recommend using writing. I mean, it's what my charity is kind of based on: journaling, free thought writing, using the worry diary to get to the root of your problems that are kind of causing you to go down these routes. Or, you know, if you are comfortable reaching out, I could, again, I know I keep referencing my charity, but that's why we're here. We have a buddy service that you can kind of get help through. We have an online community that is another safe and secure and kind of closed one that you can join on Facebook. We've got group activities, we've got singular activities. Once you make that step to reaching out, if you don't want to go the route of the 12 steps, come to someone like us, where it's almost like we hide vegetables in the food. We give ways of kind of managing cathartic and therapeutic ways that can get you out the other side. We saw it in prisons. We saw people manage addictions. We saw people manage rehabilitation. We saw people manage mental health. And it's through communication, talking, and writing.
Yeah, definitely. I really like this idea of creating safe spaces where people can go and talk without judgment and just be open with other people, whether that's their peers or someone else. I don't think we don't often do enough of that. People think, oh, I've got to clam it up, I've got to hide it. What you were saying about sort of fear of your mama finding out and how she would take it, it always makes people back off from the situation, even when they've got to the point where they know there's an issue. But actually, if we give them somewhere to go and they can just verbally throw up everything that's on their mind without worrying about it, then again, that can be enough for them to sort of have that spark to think, right, I now need to go on. I need to look at what's going on with me. I need to understand my condition and start taking those steps.
I'll tell you something just quickly I find really, really helpful. And this might be helpful to those who think, yeah, I don't fancy, you know, being part of a group. I don't really want to open up to lots of people about this. I just want to quietly get on with this. There is such a growing community online. You know, I follow loads of different accounts on Instagram that are talking about, particularly the area I'm talking about today, sobriety. So many of them, and I find them so encouraging. You know, I was on Loose Women yesterday, a bit of a contrast to today, but talking about sobriety, and I was just in the car on the way there. I wasn't driving, hence I was looking at my phone, and one of the many accounts that I follow just put up a video of Rob Lowe. Now, for a certain generation, they'll remember Rob Lowe, American actor, very good-looking chap, especially in his younger days, but has been sober for years, had a real big battle with a bottle. And I loved the thing they put up yesterday, which is what we've been saying today about giving up, having to start with you. And he said, if you're doing it for your wife, if you're doing it for your kids, if you're doing it for your friends, you're going to fail. And I just felt encouraged. Look, there's Rob Lowe saying that, you know, and there's a growing community. There's far more people out there than I ever knew about, never dared to imagine, who are doing exactly the same thing. So fill your mind and fill your heart with encouragement. You know, if you want to get on with this quietly and just think it through quietly, start following some of these accounts. You know, they're non-judgmental. They just put out, it's not all sort of corny quotes every day. Some of them are just funny. I'll follow one account called Sober Humor. You know, they're funny stuff, but hard-hitting stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there, that will really encourage you.
Yeah. And so, Simon, what advice then would you give to students who are struggling with alcohol, particularly during the early days of their studies?
I'm going to just hold my hands up and say it's a really, really hard one, because I've been asked this question a couple of times in the last few weeks online since I've started talking about it. And I try and put myself back in the early 90s and going to university. You know, I don't want to patronize anybody watching this, but, you know, yes, you are so young, particularly postgrads less so, but, you know, if you're in your early 20s, you know, I think back to the early 20 version of myself, you know, in terms of the wisdom you accrue over life, the life experience. You know, I'm such a different person now to what I was then, but that's life. Of course you are. So I do understand it's incredibly different and difficult to suddenly be away from home and to be amongst a whole new set of people. You may have gone to university with people you know, but I went to Birmingham University, didn't know anybody. And that striving to fit in became easy with alcohol. So I just want to say I totally recognize it is really difficult, but I can pretty safely predict there will be people around you who are thinking the same. They don't want their university career, there's 3 years, 5 years, whatever your course is going to last. You don't want that to be defined by alcohol. So, you know, push into that support if it's there. And just know this, you know, Paul touched on this earlier, and I recognize this is hard when you're young and you're finding your way in the world, you're discovering more about your identity and who you are and what you're going to become. You know, you're good enough without it. You know, you can be the life and soul without it. We don't need to wear masks all the time in life, because masks are exhausting, because you've got to put them on and then you've got to hold them on, and it just becomes an exhausting process. So just try, difficult though it is, just to be at peace with the fact that you can be comfortable in your own skin, and you don't need drink, you don't need drugs to be a better person or to be a more attractive person, because ultimately the people who will stand with you in the longest in life won't be the ones who are attracted to the drunk version of you, won't be attracted to the high version of you. Those people who were the kind of people long term you don't need in your life.
Really good advice, Simon, really good. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I feel like we could probably carry this conversation on for the next hour or so.
I'm all right for another hour. Let's do
it. But no, guys, it's been brilliant. You've both been wonderful. Your insights have been really good. And for everyone that's attended, I hope you found this session useful and insightful. I think for me personally, my key takeaway would be about breaking down those barriers in there, particularly where people don't want to speak up, and the strategies that we can get, and making people feel less lonely and being able to talk more openly about these these subjects and about addiction. I think to be able to cut through all the noise and all the rubbish and actually say, being sober, you know, it's actually quite good. It's liberating. You know, what you were saying about being present in the moment. Even if I was to look back at my uni days, I've probably lost loads of days where I wasn't present. And you think, well, how much of your time, life are you wasting? So that's really good. But for everyone that's watching, if you have found this session useful and you want more of these kind of tried and tested strategies to be able to support your students with their mental health, you should definitely check out Bibliospace. So Bibliospace is basically the ultimate toolkit for mental health professionals and for student services. It's jam-packed with videos, articles, podcasts, downloads, and it's providing you with endless lived experience resources you can use across the campus and support students. And as an added bonus, because we've only recently launched Bibliospace, we are offering a free 30-day trial to everyone that's attended today. And that will hit your inbox on the 1st of February. So look out for that. And if you've got any problems signing up, just get in contact with us. But like I say, 1st of February, look out for an email. You'll be able to access Bibliospace online and find all those resources and all that help. And we also have Biblio app, which gives you access to the world's leading bibliotherapy collection. It's got over 200 titles in it. It covers a range of conditions, anxiety, self-esteem, stress management, resilience, OCD, depression, sleep problems, gender and identity, loads more. It's got Simon's book in it. You should go and read it. It's awesome. It's all about dealing with grief. And the Trigger Hub app's really the sort of the perfect companion to Bibliospace, because the app can be used by students for them to be able to go and manage their mental health independently. And of course, both our speakers are available to take part in your own events and workshops across the university. As I'm sure you've seen today, they've both got a real passion for helping other people, helping them develop skills and the knowledge and the strategies, and to be able to manage their own mental health with confidence. So again, if you want to know more, either drop a comment in the chat now, or when you exit the webinar, there's a short feedback form. Just let us know on there and we'll be in touch with you and to be able to discuss that. But I want to thank everyone again today, especially Simon and Paul. You guys have been wonderful as always. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.
God bless, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Take care.